Welcome to the lecture on Module 12 on Qualitative Inquiry in BAAS 3020. My picture this time is not exactly my most photogenic picture, but it's from a journey I took in the summer of 2015 or 16, I believe. And this is a picture of me standing in a small village, or actually a medium-sized village in France called Le Puy. And in the background, you can see the Cathedral of Le Puy on this incredible rock peak that's in the middle of the city. And this picture is powerful to me, and I think it's actually very connected to our material in the course and in this lecture. And it's not so much about this day in the Puy, but about what happened the day before and some learning that came from it. The first time I ever traveled outside the United States, I was 16, getting close to 17. And I sold my car to be able to buy a plane ticket to be an exchange student in France for several months. And being from a small town, none of my peers understood this. They thought I was absolutely bonkers. Why would you sell this incredible gift of technology, the car, that gave you freedom? It allowed you to get out of the house. Living in a small town, my friends weren't nearby necessarily, and at least not in my mind. And so having a car, opened the world to me in a different way. And it's interesting at the same time, I guess I don't really think of myself as courageous. And certainly when I look back at my youth, I don't think of myself as being a very courageous person. And now I wonder if I was just curious, and that curiosity gave me a courage to take steps that I might not have taken without that curiosity. So that the curiosity lifted up my courage, if you will, to sell my car, to get on a plane for the first time, to go to a land, that I spoke rudimentary or had taken a couple years of high school French in at the time. And when I arrived in France, it was scary. Everything was new. Everything was different. Being on the plane was scary. So there was just an incredible amount of anxiety around this trip. And, I think that's probably a natural thing, almost maybe an evolutionary thing or a human thing, that if you're in a new environment, you should be on alert because you don't really know what's scary, what's threatening, what's not. So you need to be in a heightened state of awareness. And I know that for the next decades of my life, whenever I would travel, I started to notice, especially when I would travel to another country, that it was anxiety ridden. That even though they weren't places where I thought they were incredibly dangerous, it still was a different way of living and being that I didn't know and that I didn't fit into, and so there was anxiety around it. And so the day before this picture was taken, I was flying from the U.S. To France to start this month-long hike in France called the Le Puy route, walking from sort of the southern middle part of France to the border with Spain, and where the normal Camino Santiago begins for many people in their minds, Saint Jean Pied de Port. But on this journey, I was leaving, I think in the afternoon, and I would arrive the next day in Le Puy, where you see me, around noon. Well, it was a perfect storm of issues. When I got to Chicago from Dallas, the plane that was going to take us overseas had a flat tire. Who ever heard of a plane having a flat tire? This caused me the plane being 2 hours late. My first segment of the flight was into Germany, into Frankfurt, and I literally had about 15 minutes to catch my connecting flight. If you've ever been in Frankfurt, it is a nightmare of an airport. It's one of the largest, if not the largest in the world. And I ran through this airport. Yes, this is not a joke, from gate Z to gate A. I'm talking about like Z13 to A42, just hundreds of gates. Got to the gate 5 minutes before the flight, maybe a minute after they closed the door. And I didn't even realize this at the time, but so I missed this flight. So I had to wait for another connecting segment. I connected from my flight in Germany to a city in France called Lyon. When I get to Lyon, I'm supposed to take a train from Lyon to Le Puy, the village you're seeing me in. And in France, all of the train and transportation workers were on strike for better wages and better benefits. And so I had to figure out a way to get from Lyon to Le Puy. Um, I don't understand why. I still don't know, but the first part of the journey, a train was working, but it stopped short of Le Puy. They put us onto a bus, and it was, not a city bus, it was a regional bus. And I still don't know why, but this bus, instead of taking us to different cities, was dropping people off at their homes, or at least that's what it seemed like. And so it took a long time for this bus route. By the time I arrived in Le Puy, it was 11:30 at night. I was supposed to be there around noon. I had a reservation in a hotel. I had no idea where I was, and which direction the hotel was in. I'm tired. I'm exhausted. I get off the bus. I don't know which even direction to walk. And I don't have a cell phone at this point. At this time in Europe, you had to have local cell phones. You had to have a cell phone plan within each country. I just arrived. I didn't have time to get a new cell phone or a new card. And so I didn't have a SIM card for my phone. I just started walking, and within a couple blocks, there was a lady putting stuff in the back of her car. And I slowly approached her, making sure she could see me, and asked her if she knew about this hotel. And she was, she was pleasant and polite, and said something like, "Oh, this is far." It was probably about 2 or 3 miles, which is not really far, but on foot this late at night, and then trying to figure out my directions. And so this lady took a strange man, a strange foreigner, in the middle of the night. She offered me a ride and took me to the hotel. Um, and why I'm reflecting on this is that through all of this day, there really wasn't the heightened sense of anxiety that I've had in the past. And I recognized this on this trip, that I knew that I would eventually make it wherever I was going, in this case, Le Puy. And so at each part of the journey, when something happened, I didn't get overly frustrated. I may not have been happy about it, but I wasn't overly frustrated, and I knew it would work out. And there was this sense of relaxation about it. Even when I got to Lyon and had to figure out train, bus, all this stuff, I really wasn't sure about this transit. I just asked questions of the people, the agents in charge, and took one step at a time, piano piano, as the Italians say. And so this is really connected to me to this idea about this course, about discovering, about keeping curiosity alive, and how curiosity feeds other parts of our life that we don't even realize that are there. Now, when I look back at the 16-year-old I was, and I think of myself as timid and shy, I realize how courageous I was because I was curious. All right, that was a long story, so let's get on with it. In Module 12, we're going to finish up our book Curious with just a couple sections from the last chapter, the 6 and 7 from the things to stay curious, and then a brief afterword. We're going to be looking at qualitative inquiry. We have a glossary like usual, a section on studies, a section on data collection methods, qualitative inquiry in human studies, how do we do data analysis, really important, and then some great additional materials, a couple TED Talks, and then a really brief article about kidney transplants. This week you have a quiz, and then you have a very important part of your survey project, Part D. Curious. Love this book. I hope you've enjoyed it as well. These last two ways to stay curious were delightful. Question Your Teaspoons, this great story about how we think of boredom as maybe the opposite of curiosity, and yet if we really focus on the mundane, that there can be really delightfulness, entertainment in this, and some really ways to charge our curiosity. It starts out with this conference on the Boring Conference, and a really delightful story. I hadn't heard about it, but now I've looked into it, and so it's quite interesting and intriguing. Um, Turning puzzles into mysteries, looking at coding and how when we test ourselves, that sometimes these are sharpening our sword, so to speak, of curiosity, and sometimes what they are doing is becoming this part of ourselves that carries with us for life. That even though I may have solved a mystery, that journey of that mystery may become a part of myself and change who I am and how I am in the world. I think that the story I just told you about myself, and also, all the resources that we've had, it really dawns on me how powerful curiosity can be in not only helping me professionally, helping me be a more engaged citizen, but how it can help me be a happier person. And especially like when I think about that number 6 there, questioning your teaspoons. I love the analogy and example that he gives in there about working out. And when we have goals, we're always thinking about the future and the benefits of those goals. And thinking of that as a way to motivate ourselves. Oh, I want to lose weight, go to the gym. And talking about how maybe the curiosity inside of ourselves and paying a strong and consistent attention to details and to small things can actually lead us to perform better and to actually reach those goals in a different way. So very powerful stuff here. Make sure you read through this and finish up that book. And again, I hope you enjoyed it as much as I did. As we've done in many more previous modules, as we begin a new topic, in this case, qualitative inquiry, a glossary is provided that defines a lot of the terms that are used. So again, review this, take notes, and have it handy as you're continuing the reading, etc. Our next material in Canvas is called Qualitative Studies and has some great information. And I want to start with this short story that I think is very illustrative. And so it's Thanksgiving time, and we have a young couple who are hosting Thanksgiving dinner for the first time. And the wife is preparing the turkey to go into the oven hours before the dinner. And her husband notices that she cuts off the tail of the turkey before she sticks it into the oven. And so he asks her, "Why do you do that?" And the young lady replies, "Well, this is what you do. This is how you prepare turkey." And so her husband accepts that answer, and we move forward in the story. A couple hours later, the young lady's mother arrives, and she thinks back to what her husband asked her, and she had been taught to prepare the turkey by her mother. And so she said, "Hey, Mom, why do we cut off the tail of the turkey before we cook it?" And her mother gave her pretty much the same response. "Well, that's how you cook turkey. You always cut the tail off before you stick it in the oven." And so she sort of accepts this, and just as the husband did. And another hour later, the grandmother arrives. And later in the day, they're all sitting around, and the mother, the daughter, and the grandmother are sitting around. And the granddaughter asks the grandmother, well, they are all just having a conversation about preparing the turkey and why they take the tail off. And the grandmother says, "Oh, I always had to do that because my pan was too small." And so I think this is a fun story about how we accept things without questioning them, and just go through the motions, or develop habits or actions or behaviors because we were taught something without ever understanding the why behind it. And so I think that's a good introduction to this kind of qualitative studies. There's a lot of great information in here about how we collect data in a qualitative way versus the quantitative way, mostly quantitative way that we've been focusing on so far in terms of surveying, etc. There's a great video in here with Dr. Shannon Kelleher, who works for the city of Frisco and has an interesting role. And there's some great examples and stories in here about how not only qualitative studies and questioning, that we've been learning about in the course is important, but it's a basic function in all of our jobs, that if we're good at it, it's really going to help us be more successful in our career. If we know how to ask questions, how to get data, this will help us make decisions. And so this isn't just a BS class. This can be a class about really understanding and improving your ability to ask questions, get data, and to make suggestions for how to improve operations, etc. Good section. Our next Canvas material is talking about how do we do data collection in a qualitative inquiry, talking about field observations, interviews, sometimes doing background document research as far as like newspapers, journals, letters between individuals, looking at audiovisual and digital materials, conducting focus groups, and the stages of interviews. And so it's a very short section. It's very almost intuitive, but it's also very insightful about how we do collect data, specifically when we're trying to do a qualitative type of inquiry. Our next material in Canvas is Qualitative Inquiry / Human Studies, and a specific focus on human studies. Although qualitative studies are used for non-human research, you might think of the Jane Goodall research into primates, or Diane Fossey into great apes, by observing them in their natural habitat. Qualitative studies are more commonly used to study human behavior. And so here we have just a brief section about some of the vocabulary, some of the approaches, naturalism, ethnography, pay special attention to the grounded theory and how this is different than a theory in science, etc. What's different about a case study approach to how we've been looking at surveying and collecting data. Also pay special attention to what an action inquiry is and this concept of emancipatory research. Our next section, again, is a very short section on data analysis and the qualitative process. But what I want you to think about this is that this is really insightful for our everyday life, and especially our everyday professional life, but also our outside of professional, our personal life. In qualitative analysis, we're not always analyzing quantitative things. We're looking for more thematic, what is happening, etc. And this is a more challenging process in some ways because it is kind of abstract. And so some of the things we do here to set up our analysis to try to make sure that our study is valid and reliable is to do coding. And this is when we put things into categories such as helping behaviors, isolated behaviors, etc., so that we can start focusing what we're looking for, and then have a way to kind of use some quantitative, how many behaviors do they do, etc. So it's this kind. It is a more thoughtful and challenging process. It goes through memoing, concept mapping, which is really key, and you see a diagram here on the right on the slide about thinking about the key processes or categories, and then using verbs to explain how they are connected and what is the relationship between them. Some specific, or really they're kind of general steps for doing qualitative analysis. But I think the real value in this section, besides what we're doing as far as doing inquiry processes, is thinking about validity strategies and reliability strategies. Now remember, validity is about measuring what you really want to know. And it's really just about the word you see there, validating, right? Can you double check your information? Look for biases. Look for repeated observations. Think about those things I just said and how important that is in your professional and daily life. I think on every team I've ever worked at, when we've been in team meetings, people tend to try to support their ideas with specific um, examples which are anecdotal, not necessarily representative of a repeated behavior. So often it's the outlier. Oh, a student did this. Oh, a customer did this. And it's this one off example that may not really be valid across the population as a whole. And you want to make processes and systems based on probability, not possibility, right? You want to be able to handle those outliers, but you don't want processes designed for outliers. You want processes or systems designed, laws, regulations designed for the masses as opposed to one or two offs, if you will. And again, this is the same thing with reliability. Remember, this means you get the same results time after time. And this is more a challenge. And I think when you think about what we do in our life as a whole, in general, we spend a lot more time in the qualitative side, making judgments about things. We've seen this in our culture of late here about people buying into theories, buying into ideas, buying into false information because they haven't done those things about validating it, checking it, or seeing if it's reliable. Is this what's really happening again and again and again? Or is this an outlier? Or is this really representative of a larger percentage of the population? Remember that as humans, we tend to, I think, evolutionarily focus on highly emotional things, right? You're walking down through Florida and an alligator leaps out. Wow. You pay attention to that. That's an evolutionary strategy for our body, right? We want to pay attention to that because it's dangerous. So as things get heightened in the news, in the media, in conversations with our friends on social media, the heightened things take more attention and more energy and become more memorable. That doesn't mean that they are valid or reliable. And so, again, I think this course not only is a great work course, it's a great thing about surveying, etc. Everyone thinks they can conduct a survey. And as you've learned by now, it's not just easy in putting some questions together. And especially these two questions about validity and reliability are important in surveying, but they're important in our lives to make sure that we're not being swept up in an emotional storm, and to really do some to show up in a different way in our life and at work. I'm telling you that these are key skills that if you have will help you rise through the ranks if that's what you choose to do. And then some information here about generalizing qualitative research, and then what are the ethical issues around qualitative research. Excuse me. It's interesting here that they end this section saying that qualitative is really about human studies. Yeah, you can do some business with it, but not a lot. But the video we watched in the first section really showed how qualitative information and questioning can be very powerful in a business situation. So I don't like that last statement on this slide. In our last section of Canvas materials, the additional materials, we have a really brief article about how qualitative research was used in the medical area, specifically in the area of kidney transplant, to reveal some things that were very important to the success and support of kidney transplant patients that only came up through qualitative research. We then have a couple of TED Talks. The first one is on grounded questions, and a really fascinating talk about grounded questions versus abstract thinking, and how maybe our education process, our culture, and our society has led us down this abstract road of creating systems and processes that really work against our very nature, and even the changes that they inspire may not be successful long-term changes because they don't go deep enough, or are natural enough to what we I guess aspire to. Um, Great talk, don't miss it. And then the last one on ethnography is an amusing look at ethnography and how this process evolved over time, and how it really kind of helps bring the obvious to light. And I love that she says something like, the obvious isn't obvious until it's pointed out that it's obvious. And so I think it's a great other video. These are I think, again, great learning opportunities, pertinent to the course, of course, but pertinent to your life and pertinent to your success in work, and even socially. So our last slide today is on our assignment, which is about survey part D, which is about analyzing the results of the survey. This is a very important part of your project. And so you really need to take some time individually to go through the example. And then as a team, you should go through the example as well, probably before you start trying to format your data. Undoubtedly, one or two members will try to go ahead and get a lot of this knocked out, but it's important to go through the example and understand the comments made in this example so that you can do a good job on the assignment.